The biggest transition I experienced in my life is immigrating to this country when I was 16 years old. I had to figure out a new culture, almost a new identity. I won't pretend that I did not feel nervous, that I did not struggle with imposter syndrome. The speed of change, and we've been seeing it for, decades, but it's at a level like never before. Every single day, in fact, multiple times during the day, things shift so fast because of technology, because of everything that isn't happening in the global environment. If I feel that I'm too much in my comfort zone, I'm starting to get complacent, I'm too comfortable, and that scares me. The word transition, transformation, it's another big word. It's almost a buzzword, and you see that thrown around willy-nilly without really understanding what transformation truly is. For leaders, communicating effectively or clear communications stops at talking about the structural changes, the technical components of that transformation, whether it's changing. But what often gets less attention is understanding that a lot of people in the organization are going to be experiencing uncertainty, fear, curiosity, hope, all these different emotions, and often all at the same time in different degrees.
Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes. What if the biggest challenge in transformation isn't strategy, but people? In today's rapidly changing world, organizations are constantly evolving. New systems, new structures, new expectations. But behind every transformation are individuals navigating uncertainty, fear, and change in their own way. Today, I'm joined by Salima Hemani, who brings a powerful perspective on what it really takes to lead transformation that's sustainable. Let's dive in. Hi, Salima.
Hi, Reena.
Welcome to Thriving Changes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Same here. I was really excited about this.
We had such a great pre-call, and there are times when I regret not recording that.
Hopefully we can replicate that right now again.
I'm sure we'll do better. So how we do is that I invite my guests to share a little bit about themselves and their background and what they do, and then we take it from there.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm happy to. So again, my name is Salima Hemani. I'm the president of SZH Consulting. We are a management consulting firm based in the Washington, D.C. area. We work with organizations to help them build leadership systems, structures, and capabilities that allow strategy, talent, and execution to move as one. My work sits at the intersection of organizational design, leadership development, and large-scale transformation. I've been in this field, I'm going to age myself by saying this, over 25 years, and I absolutely love it. And I see now as one of the best times to do this work with so many organizations experiencing change in so many different areas, and change because of the external environment that we are all operating in. So it's an exciting time to be doing this work.
Thank you. I can understand. There's just so much change happening. Post-pandemic, it's been with cost cuts and layoffs, and there's just a lot going on. And AI implementation. There's a lot of change happening, and it's hard. People seem to be lost and directionless, I guess.
Yeah.
So I love to dig deep into that. I usually like to start from a personal angle, from a personal perspective. So you yourself have personally gone through a couple of transformations,
yes,
right? Whether it was your coming to the US, and then, of course, moving from your corporate position to starting your own entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
So shed some light. What did you experience in those transformations?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a little bit about my journey. The biggest transformation or the biggest transition I experienced in my life is immigrating to this country when I was 16 years old, which is a very interesting age because you're just trying to figure out things about yourself. And then in my case, I had to figure out a new culture, almost a new identity. And it taught me an important lesson that I can embrace change. I can transition successfully. It taught me skills of resilience and courage. And even when you don't have all the answers and things are not always exactly clear, taking one step at a time can lead to more clarity and a place of success. So that was my first experience with large scale transition in my professional journey. As you alluded, Reena, I've had multiple pivots. I started my career with a company that was called, back then when I started with them, was Anderson Consulting. They're now known as Accenture, and I started in their technology consulting practice. And I did that for a few years, and I realized that I liked people side of things more than the technology side of things. And so my first big pivot as a professional was transitioning from technology consulting into the human capital consulting practice at Accenture, and did that for about 13 years. And from there, I realized for me, the next step of growing in my professional career was experiencing being inside organizations, not as a consultant, but working within systems. And so I went on to take on a number of leadership positions. I was at BA Systems, Marriott International, Northrop Grumman, leading organizational effectiveness, talent management functions. And then in 2018, I had another big pivot in my career, and I decided to start SZH Consulting. And really that was inspired by my desire to work more closely with organizations who wanted to build systems where people can do their best work. They can show up as their best selves. And so that led to my creating SZH Consulting and these systems that not only support individual growth, but also organizational growth. So throughout my personal journey, there have been a lot of changes, transitions, pivots, and the single theme, the single inspiration is each of them have allowed me to grow in a different direction. And I recognize the need for transition, for pivot, by recognizing that I was at a point where I wanted something different. I wanted to grow in a different way. So they've all been great learning experiences. They've required me to step into things that were not always clear. I knew that I was ready for something different, more challenges, different types of challenges, but I had to trust myself and I had to bet on myself and move forward with courage. So I think that's the key thing that I've learned as I've had these different pivots in my life.
I'll just hook on to that last bit that you said when you said courage and that trust myself and bet on myself. Did it come naturally? Or did you experience some hesitation? I experienced imposter syndrome when I started out. Or was it a part of your personality and you knew how to deal with it?
I won't pretend that I did not feel nervous, that I did not struggle with imposter syndrome. And it's one of those things that I think when you're challenging yourself on a regular basis, you almost have to think of imposter syndrome as a friend. It's going to be there. And you have to take action in spite of that or despite of that. So for me, in each one of those cases, with the exception of the immigration to this country, which I did with my family and was out of my control, and was the first time where I'm going through that level of change and learning to trust my ability to survive, to make that transition, to thrive on the other side. I think that was a real lesson that has carried me, that if I can make that big level of transition and change at such an early age, I'm able to do hard things. I'm able to take on harder challenges. So for me, I always say the biggest red flag for me that I need to transition to something different is when things become too easy for me. I feel like I'm getting complacent. And that's when I realize, look, I'm ready for that next, whatever that is. So in some ways, because of my journey as an immigrant, has set me up with skills, with that resiliency muscle that has allowed me to make these other changes later on in my life.
I love this, and I love how you framed it when you say that anytime you feel nervous or you feel, the way you frame the language, that I've done harder things before and I can do this, it reflects that growth mindset. And I'm a huge neuroscience junkie as well.
Yeah.
And what it does is the positive reflection. The brain needs to hear it. It just can't work if you know it in your heart, it also needs that tangible, those words.
Yes.
And so when we say it to ourselves that, look, I've done this before and I can do it, it's difficult, yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't handle it. It's a new concept and I'll figure it out. Immediately comes the system, and then the minute you have that calmness,
Yeah.
the clarity also comes.
Absolutely. And what I've learned, Reena, for myself is that courage grows when you step into the arena, even if you don't feel fully ready. So every time I've done hard things, I've collected these examples for myself that, hey, Salima, you've done hard things and you've been able to do them. And look, success or failure is not guaranteed, but you have to take the step, and you've taken the steps and you've figured things out. And they've not always gone maybe the way you think things will go when you started out, but there's always a lesson learned. And that in itself is such a valuable thing. The gift of learning, regardless of the outcomes, I think is so powerful. And so when you go in with the intention that if nothing else, I'm going to learn something new that I don't know, and I have to be bold and courageous to go after that learning, that lesson, that in itself for me is quite inspirational.
It makes so much sense. Even in my personal experience, as you said, that you don't have to be ready. You have to step in even when you feel that you're not ready.
Yes.
And are we ever fully ready? I don't feel fully ready even now.
Yeah.
But we always raise the bar. You
Yes.
achieve a certain level and then you start aiming for something else. So then you're not ready for that. But you have to still keep doing. Take that one tiny little step and keep doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Complacency is my biggest fear. I don't want to be complacent. That's the work that we do with our organizations, right? Helping them not stay in the zone of complacency, because especially nowadays at an organizational level, as society, as community, as individuals, we absolutely cannot be complacent at all, because the change, whether we want it or not, like it or not, there's just so much shifting and changing, and it seems like the speed of change, and we've been seeing it for, I know, decades, but it's at a level like never before. Every single day, in fact, multiple times during the day, things shift so fast because of technology, because of everything that isn't happening in the global environment.
Absolutely.
So we cannot afford to be complacent. And so for me, that is a big driver. If I feel that I'm too much in my comfort zone, I'm starting to get complacent, I'm too comfortable, and that scares me. I know now that I need to pull myself. I need to go for that next level of change transition.
And it keeps you relevant as well. That
Yes.
you keep up to date. Otherwise, if we don't embrace that, then we'll get outdated pretty
Yes,
soon.
exactly.
Within our jobs as well.
That's right.
So that was personal side of transition, but your larger experience now is with organizations and
Yes.
managing. So what does it actually mean when organizations say that we are in the midst of a transition? What does it mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, the word transition, transformation, it's another big word. It's almost a buzzword, and you see that thrown around willy-nilly without really understanding what transformation truly is. And in my books, in my opinion, transformation within organization is when you are changing how you work, the ways of working. It's not just about that surface level process change, but you are transforming, changing systems, behaviors, mindsets, all of those things, structures, to enable new ways of working, to enable new ways of engaging. That's transformation. So I think that you use the word transition, there could be this superficial level of transition. Transformation is just slap on or introduce a new strategy or change a few processes. That's really surface level. When we talk about transformation and true transition, it's really looking at how do we change the way we work? How do we change the way we show up? How do we change the way we engage? And that requires changing systems, mindsets, behaviors.
I totally get it. When you do it at that large scale level, one is just talking about it. We have that crafted out.
Yeah.
But when it has to play out, You're talking like hundreds of people.
Yes. Right.
So what's the process like?
Yeah.
Another way to say it would be, how do I transfer this thought into the entire organization?
Yeah. I call it the 3 C's, right? It's clarity, courage, and communication. So being really clear about the why behind the transformation. Why are we investing? Why are we doing it? Why are we changing systems, behaviors, mindsets? Why do we need to do that? What is the impetus? What's driving this? And having this clear, strong why, the principles, the values, the core reasons behind, clarity around that. Leaders having the courage not to only expect the people to change, but themselves aligning their own behaviors, changing their own behaviors in support of the change that they're trying to, or transformation that they're trying to create. And then communicating clearly, communicating often, communicating even when not everything is completely clear, but keeping those lines of communication open, and also being able to understand what the people, you mentioned hundreds of people that might be impacted through that transformation, what their journey could be like. So not only speaking to the rational part of change that they will experience, but acknowledging the emotions, the feelings that the organization, the people are going to go through as they go through this journey of transformation, and actively doing the work to address that as well. Helping people go through that proverbial change curve. That's really critical.
You've brought in so many concepts here, and I would love to dig into each one of those. One is the emotions. Let's start with the people side of, because you mentioned before that, yes, it might start with systems or processes, but ultimately it's the people who are doing it. And they are also changing along with the organization, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just the mission or vision or the processes or systems, but it's the people who are also changing. So tell me, what exactly is people first, or thinking about them when you are going through such major transitions or transformations?
Yeah. We do a lot of work, for example, in the organizational redesign or operating redesign space. And oftentimes, for leaders, communicating effectively or clear communications stops at talking about the structural changes, the technical components of that transformation, whether it's changing, to your point, the processes that are changing, or the org chart that's changing, and the new roles and all of that, and explaining that, and then connecting it to the strategy. Great. But what often gets less attention is understanding that a lot of people in the organization are going to be experiencing uncertainty, fear, curiosity, hope, all these different emotions, and often all at the same time in different degrees. And so not really in their communication, or when they're engaging and talking to people about the change, those feelings are often neglected and not even acknowledged. And sometimes it's a matter of acknowledging those feelings, that they exist in people, and creating spaces where they can be shared, and shared so that people can go through this journey of change at a pace that enables them to come out of it with a much stronger alignment and understanding and support towards that change. So I'll give you an example. This was a long time ago. We were working with a hospitality company, and they were rolling out a brand new technology to be used at different properties. And this technology was going to change lives. It's going to make the work of the front desk staff 10 times easier, all that good stuff. And we were supporting the rollout of this change, this new technology. And what we found is that when they actually got to implementation, they got a ton of resistance from the very people who this technology was supposed to help. They'd been getting these, like, our systems are so old, we struggle, it takes us double, triple the time to do what could be done with a new system. So we thought they'd be really excited, because it's not like their jobs are changing, nobody's losing a job. In fact, this is making their lives much easier. And those were the people that we got the most resistance from. And then we dug into it a little bit more, because we were holding these spaces, like what is it that's behind that resistance? Because we've now spoken to the rational side of how this change will benefit. And what it came down to was, for a lot of the people who'd been working in the old system for a while, there was a sense of pride. I figured this old, clunky system out. I now know how to exactly work it in a way that makes me an expert in this system. And we didn't realize how much of individual identities were tied with the old system and the old ways of doing things. So rationally, logically, it made sense, the new system, but emotionally, they weren't ready for that. They weren't ready for having a different relationship with these tools, and potentially that impacted how they were viewed by their colleagues, especially the people who had been there for a long time, had mastered the old system. And that's what I speak to, is these emotional side, the feelings. So mentally they might be there, but their heart might not have come along. And we don't often create spaces when we're doing large scale change or transformation of any kind to make sure that it's not just the mind, that we are bringing the hearts along as well, because that's when change really sticks.
I love that. I love that. Along with it, it's that mastering, learning the new system. It's another challenge altogether.
Yes, right.
And then it's embarrassing if you don't know about it, or you have to go and ask for help, and all those things show up.
Yeah, all of a sudden I was the guy that everybody would come to if they needed help with the system, because I have been here for whatever 15, 20 years. I figured it out. I know all the shortcuts. I have my shortcut keys, right? They printed it out. Like, I know how, and I have such a sense of pride because I'm the person. And that's another way I find my job valuable, and I find value in what I do, is because I'm considered an expert.
Yeah.
And
suddenly
we were taking that away. We were taking that away, and we were doing it without even realizing that there was so much pride and value that the individual got from that feeling.
So when that resistance does show up, how can leaders deal with that?
Yeah, I think it starts with really self-reflection and acknowledgement that, there is going to be an emotional aspect to this change. Even if it's, as I said, a technology change, people don't think about it. So I think it starts with recognizing that we need to give people space to not only mentally go through the change, but emotionally go through the change. And that's where the desire is to, we've spoken to the rational, we made the logical case for this. Why aren't people coming along? Without recognizing that we also need to now create spaces where people can work through the emotional challenges that they might be having. And not everybody is going to come at the same pace. People are going to have different paces as they go through this change journey. Even in the example I gave you, somebody who was newer in their role, for them it was, oh great, I got a new system. I'm so excited. Yes, I need to spend some time learning the new system, and that's going to take me, I might not be able to do things as fast as I can today because I'm learning something new, versus somebody who's been in the role a long time. But creating the spaces for people to do that work, providing coaching, being a coach to the employees who might have a different pace of going through that change journey than the leaders themselves. I think this is important, but oftentimes the leaders are so focused on getting to the other side that they assume that it's a one-size-fit-all model, that everybody goes through the journey at the same pace, which is not true. And then that because they've done this logical, they made the logical case for it and provided that logical communication, the logical why, that automatically everybody should just get behind it. And that might not always be the case. So creating spaces, holding these spaces, whether it's some of our clients, one of the things that we offer and work with is providing not only leaders, but people in the organization, coaching to go through that journey in the most effective way. And what coaching does is it provides that space for people to bring up fear, bring up their emotions about identity or uncertainty, and help them work through those in support of the change.
Is it easy for people to show up their emotions? Maybe in one-on-one coaching sessions, yes, once you've built a rapport, but when in, let's say, in a team space, when does that require a cultural shift? do you structure it that leaders start modeling that kind of behavior themselves before they expect others to join or show similar ways of responses or how to respond to it?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great question. I always say it starts at the very top. If the leaders create a role model themselves being vulnerable and open and honest about their own challenges with the change or about their own feelings, it gives others the courage and the space to do that as well. I think it's both. It's the role modeling by the leaders, right? Because there are absolutely some cultures where people might not feel psychologically safe to be as vulnerable, to be able to be so expressive and open and explicit with their emotions and feelings. So in that case, the leader role modeling that behavior gives this implicit permission for others to be able to do the same. And then providing the structure for them to share those feelings in the most productive way so that meetings don't become a complaining session or where people are just sharing grievances without productive outcomes. So it's the leadership behavior, but also providing structure. And what I mean by structure is some of our clients, we've seen them create forums to bring people together in a very facilitated way to share their feelings and fears about the change or changes with an experienced facilitator. So those communications, those meetings, those conversations could be more productively managed rather than just becoming a complaining session. And that brings down the morale of the entire organization. So both those things are important, creating that tone from the very top, but then also helping create the structures, providing the structures for those conversations to be handled and facilitated in a productive way, with the intention of helping people come out on the other side. And having said that, Reena, there will be some people that will also recognize that, look, the change where the organization is headed is not in alignment with where I see myself going. And sometimes those situations also create ahas for people where they're like, I either cannot commit to this change or this is not in alignment with the vision for myself, or I'm unable to evolve to the state that this organization needs me to evolve to be successful in that future state. And I find it's even successful when people have those ahas and they make that decision whether to continue or not to continue with the organization. And sometimes I feel leaders struggle with that. They don't want to accept that. And I often say that's a win-win for the organization because that allows you to move forward with the people and the capabilities and the talent that you really need that will support that new vision for the organization. And for the individuals who are not ready or unable or unwilling to move forward with that evolution, to also have clarity and find other options.
That's so well put because there's so many layers to it. So yes, you did mention that it starts from the top, but the executives are probably on board with everything. Their vision is clear. They're embodying the behaviors required. But then when it comes down to the next senior level, mid-level team leads, if we see a misalignment and if there is a resistance, then how does it, because then they are the ones who will take it beyond to their teams. So if there is a resistance there, then what does a leader do?
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful question, Reena. And we see this all the time. To your point, you could have the top level of the organization, the top was the C-suite. You've got them saying the right things. Actions are aligned with the words that they're saying, all of that. We've got full alignment. And then you get to the middle level and you start seeing covert and overt resistance. Overt resistance, great, because we can see it, we can address it. Covert resistance is harder. And I think at that point, it's really the top level leadership holding the mid-tier, the mid-level managers who are going to be the first line of communication to the rest of the organization oftentimes, to hold them accountable to role modeling the behavior that they need to role model to bring the rest of the organization along, to be able to overtly express any disagreements they have, then covertly try to demotivate or distract from the change. So I think that accountability piece from the topmost level of the organization when it comes to that middle level, making sure that they're role modeling the behaviors that need to be role modeled. They're representing the change the way that it needs to be represented to bring the rest of the organization along. And even if they disagree, to bring that up overtly for discussion and really commit to committing. So one of our clients had shared this with me, which I love, this whole concept of ACDC. I don't know if you've heard this, Reena. Agree and commit, or disagree and commit. So you can disagree at that top level, bring up overtly your concerns. Let's talk about it. We've discussed it. You might not agree with every single thing that the top level leadership has decided. You've had this opportunity to share your concerns. But when you leave the room and you go to the rest of the organization, you go with a commitment. You've committed to the change, and then you have to role model the behaviors in alignment with the change that will bring the rest of the organization along. It also means that holding that middle level accountable to doing the coaching work, to creating spaces for others in the organization who might not understand or disagree with or have emotions around this change, to be able to express those things to those managers in the most productive way.
So I know that coaching has come up a couple of times, and I'm wondering that with so much change happening now, there have been layoffs. The workforce has gone down in so many organizations.
Yeah.
People are multitasking. They're managing so many other things at the same time. Do they have the time at their disposal to actually do that coaching? And my other question related would be that given the hybrid model that most organizations are now having, with that disconnectivity, how do you bring everybody on board when we are not meeting or seeing each other so often? And is the vision, mission, the strategy, is everybody on board with it? How do we measure it?
Yeah, I hear two parts to your question. I'm going to answer them separately. One is, how do you make sure that everyone in the organization continues to stay aligned to the mission, vision for the organization, vision for any kind of transformation. And I think that requires building the discipline around it. So whether it's a hybrid model, we've even seen when, even if people are all co-located, that those misalignments can very easily happen if you don't have the discipline of making sure that you are communicating in a way that follows the trail all the way to the very bottom of the organization. And there's a discipline and structure around that. That's happening regularly. It's happening with clarity. It's happening not necessarily adding more meetings, but making sure that every action, every decision that the organization is making, leaders across all levels are making, is anchored back to the mission, vision of the organization, the priorities, the goals. That's really critical, because I think there's the fastest way to disengage people is when they don't understand how their work connects to the broader purpose of the organization. And we've seen so many organizations unintentionally being guilty of that, because oftentimes that clarity, even if they do it, stops at that mid-level and then it doesn't follow through. So that discipline, that capability building, that responsibility for making sure that across all levels, actions and decisions keep on anchoring back to the broader purpose, to the mission, vision, will help make sure that the organization stays in alignment without adding more meetings, without sending more emails and newsletters. After a while, people start ignoring. It's just white noise. So taking those tactical steps. So that's, I think, another thing to your earlier question about how do people find time for coaching and doing that kind of reflective work. I very much believe that a critical skill, as we especially move into an era where there's going to be even more complexity, organizational complexity, this ability around adaptive leadership and systems thinking is so critical for leaders. And that means this whole idea that is introduced through adaptive leadership is the idea of balcony versus the dance floor. Now, most leaders get caught up in that reactive, being on the dance floor, putting out fires, reacting to things that are happening, and don't spend enough time being on the balcony, really reflecting and that big picture thinking and looking across systems. And the risk of not doing that and staying continuously on the dance floor is you miss trends. You miss the opportunity to be proactive about events that might shape your organization, your business, all of that stuff. So it's really critical to find that time to be on the balcony and doing it on a regular basis. And what investing in coaching allows you to do is hold yourself accountable to being on that balcony from time to time on a regular basis so that you can more effectively lead your organization as things around us become more complex.
Oh, that's so beautifully put. I absolutely get that. And so needed in times of change. And especially as you're saying that we're only moving to more complexities in the future.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there are times when we can't even imagine that what kind of change is coming, even from the outside. But within the organizations, I think AI is rewriting
Yes.
the map.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and it's a new thing. We are all learning as we're moving along. So all that uncertainty, that fear, it's all showing up in everybody. I guess that space is so needed. Just going to the balcony, that opens up space to really reflect on what areas do I really need to focus so that those fires don't happen very often.
And for a lot of leaders, and I will admit it, I will be vulnerable. Like for me too, it's in some ways easier to be on the dance floor because the reward is instant. You put out a fire, you instantly get this, okay, you've done this, you've achieved this. When you're on the balcony and you're looking across and you're doing that big blue ocean type of thinking, that requires a different skill set. It requires practice and discipline. And it's not instant gratification. You haven't put out a fire, but it's so important to spend that time so that you don't have as many fires to deal with.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you put out one fire and there'll be another fire because you've never taken out the time to look across and say, hey, how can I prevent fires from happening? Right? How can we be proactive about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned the surface level and real transition. So how do you recognize it? Can you recognize it? Let's say you've implemented certain changes and you've been working with the organization for some time. Can you recognize that is the transformation really happening or is it just surface level?
Yeah, one of the biggest signs that I've picked up on through my experience is when leaders want change to happen without changing themselves. That means that they are not willing to look at themselves and what behaviors, what mental models, what ways of thinking I need to shift to truly enable and support and do this transformation in the truest sense of the word. As we said up at the beginning, for me, transformation is not just about changing processes or announcing new strategies. It's really doing the work of changing how work happens by changing systems, behaviors, mindsets, all of that. So when that deeper level work, and it starts at that leadership level. When I don't see them committing to that work, then I know that it's going to be surface level. And then it's not truly transformation. It's a surface level change at best. And then how can you expect the rest of the organization to truly come along and for it to authentically stick? That's important. It won't authentically transform or change the organization because it's at that surface level.
So what do you do in that space?
Yeah. For us as consultants, I see we're not just consultants, we're advisors and we're trusted partners. And that's the kind of relationship we aim to build with our clients. And being a trusted partner means having the tough conversation, sometimes holding up the mirror and saying, this is the hard work that we see you needing to do still, because you've shared your vision. This is what you're trying to accomplish. It's rarely that people will bring us they will say, oh, can you just help me change this process? Oftentimes, we're brought in because the client has a grand and ambitious vision around transformation of some type. So we anchored the conversation back to that vision that they've shared with us at the very beginning. And one of the things we always do when we start working with our clients is we talk about what does success look like? What would achieving this vision that you've set, what does it actually mean? And how would you measure success of that? So then we are able to anchor back to that and say, okay, this is the tough work that still needs to be done, and this needs to be done by you, because if it isn't done by you, it's definitely not going to happen in the rest of the organization. And I think that's oftentimes we find the feedback we get is that our clients find that valuable because we've built that trust with them. And one of the ways we build that trust is being honest about these things.
So, what do you think? What are some non-negotiables when we are talking about transformation?
Yeah, I think that the biggest non-negotiable when it comes to transformation is thinking about transformation in a very limited, in a very siloed way. For true transformation to happen, it's looking across all key dimensions of an organization and thinking through the impacts to all those dimensions. And what I mean by that, Reena, is that looking at your structure, looking at your talent and capabilities, looking at your systems, looking at the processes, looking at leadership, looking at the mindsets and mental models and culture and values, and all those things. Because let's say I want to transform my organization to scale my business from a 200 to a $400 million company. I'm just making this up. That's not just going to require you just changing the structure or bringing a new leadership team or have a different set of sales goals. Each of these things in itself will not get you to that level of transformation. So it's really the ability to look across all the key dimensions and how they can all be adjusted, calibrated in service to that transformation vision and goal. When clients bring us in with a very narrow understanding of what it would take to achieve, first of all, one of the things we do is we are very clear what is that transformation vision and what is the end goal and what does success look like. But once we have that, if they're looking at it in a very narrow way, just redesign my leadership level or leadership layer, or I need a new org structure, that's a red flag for me, because they're not thinking expensively enough for true transformation to truly happen. And so one of the things we do, Reena, when we start, it's a best practice. When we start working on any such engagement, we always start with an organizational assessment. And I'm very clear, when we do an organizational assessment, we have a tool we use. It's looking across all of these dimensions, because true transformation will happen when we are able to recalibrate all these different dimensions.
Got it. What do you think are certain values which help or support the transformation?
If I understand your question correctly, Reena, the values, you're referring to values that leaders have to hold tight during times of
transformation. Yeah.
I think for me that the first things that comes to mind are two things: honesty and integrity. Being really honest about the why behind the transformation, being clear and honest, and making sure that the communication around the transformation, not at the very beginning, but throughout, you continue to be clear and honest, whether the things are going as planned, and even when things are not going as planned, or things are taking longer, or you're discovering things that are having you shift the vision you've communicated, whatever it might be. I think that's really important, because that speaks to the authenticity aspect. And there's no faster way to lose people and disengage employees when they feel that you're not being authentic, you're not being honest with them. You break trust, right? And that's the worst thing. And then you've lost them. And I think the second key value for me is integrity in actions. So making sure your words match your actions. If you say we want to create a more innovative culture, we want to transform to be a much more innovative organization. Great slogan, great value, all that stuff. But if your actions as leaders, you're continuing to intentionally, unintentionally create obstacles where people are afraid to bring new ideas, right? Are afraid to fail. Innovation, you have to be a little bit comfortable with failure when you're trying to be creative. But if your organization your leadership team has no appetite, no capacity, no tolerance for failure, you're saying one thing, you want to be more innovative, but then your actions don't support that desire, that vision that you have for the organization. So honesty in communications, clarity in communications, and integrity in actions. Those are, in my opinion, key values that can make or break a transformation.
When we talk about sustainable transformation, so how does one measure it? How do you measure it as you're going and in, let's say, 2 to 3, 5 years, that it's really sustained itself?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. In our line of work, we're often doing a lot of org restructuring, org redesign. And so we look at things such as efficiency in decision making speed or accountability clarity or looking at performance metrics, things like that as we're going through, because those are things that upfront when we are contracting with the client and talking about what the vision is and how you measure success. So those are things that we kind of measure along the way and soon after the changes and the transformation has happened. And I'm sure if you're doing a technology transformation, there's something more specific you're going to be looking at. But in general, those are the kind speed of decision making, accountability, clarity, performance factors, performance metrics, things like that are more tactical, like spans of control and those things. I think longer term, from my perspective, is you see the organization more stabilized. And what I mean by that is you're not seeing them going through a restructuring transformation exercise every couple of years, because you've transformed and evolved the organization where it has the capacity and capability to deal with the complexities it's facing, that there's alignment between leadership and the organizational systems. So for me, that's a long-term indication of the success of transformative efforts, right? Is that level of stability that we've introduced into the organization. And there's more alignment between people and systems within the organization so that it could respond to increasing levels of complexity from the external environment.
So coming back to your entrepreneurial journey, so we, of course, from the outside, we see a very successful individual, we see a successful business. What are some behind the scene, like everyday struggles of an entrepreneur, so to say?
And I think, Reena, you being same, I think you might be able to relate to some of this stuff as well. It's the not knowing. Every day is an adventure. It's becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable every single day. Every single day you're navigating uncertainty while you're trying to build something that's meaningful and sustainable. Consulting business, I would say, in fact, all business, there's a lot of peaks and valleys. And one thing that I've learned is that it's important to not get overconfident when you're at the peak and not lose confidence when you're in the valley. So being able to manage that. And when you are running and building a business, you are wearing so many different hats. You're doing client delivery, you are doing business development, you are doing talent management, you're balancing strategy versus operations. You're doing all of that all the time. And it's just finding that balance of doing all those things while not losing sight of the vision, the ultimate vision that you have for your organization, for your business. So those things are things that people don't see from the outside. They only see achievements, but they don't see all the work that leads to that one achievement that they might see on LinkedIn or an announcement or a press release. It's all that stuff. The distinction that I found going from working for companies to having my own company, when you're working for corporations, organizations, you are managing within systems to some extent. When you have your own business, you're designing the system itself. So it takes a lot more, you have to act with a lot more courage, a lot more ownership, a lot more resilience. You have to hold yourself accountable in a way that you don't have to when you're part of within a system. So those are some of the things that over the past 7 years I've learned and continue to learn. Every day is an opportunity to learn something new.
Absolutely. So how do you look back at it all?
Oh, with a lot of gratitude. It has been such an incredible learning experience. And there are people who've done this, have said, oh, I always knew that I'm going to have my own company and I had this vision. I did not know. So it's a lot of it has been, as we started our conversation and talked about this, I had an inkling that I was ready for something different. And then stepping into the unknown, knowing that I can trust myself to do hard things. I've never shied away from hard things. I've not only been able to do it, but I've come out stronger every single time, even when I didn't want to do the hard things. So having that trust, it has really helped. And what I've achieved most through this journey, having done all of this, Reena, for me has been all the lessons, all the learnings. It has made my life so much richer. And as a mom of a young girl, to be able to share those lessons with her, I could not have gained them had I not had the journey I've had. So that has been a blessing.
Lovely. What's next? Any major, for your own, is there something that you're planning, if you can talk about it?
Yeah. I think for me, it's continuing to scale SZH Consulting, continue to grow the business, the firm, continue to work with great clients, helping them get ready for, as I mentioned, increasing organizational complexity because of all the changes that we're seeing come. AI is top of mind. We are doing a lot of work in helping clients think about how agentic AI is going to shift the way they do work, how they're assigning who's doing what work, how do they measure performance when you have a workforce that might be in the next 3 to 4 years, 40% agentic AI, technology driven, and the mix between human and technology is going to be, it's going to look very different and not too far from where we are right now in the next few years. So thinking about all those things is really exciting for me. And I'm glad that we get to work with leaders and organizations that are really interested in that. And I see SZH Consulting continue to do more work in that space. So I'm really looking forward. That's the next frontier. I'm challenged by that. I'm excited by that. And I think it aligns very well with where I see SZH Consulting going.
Lovely. So my last question would be, if there is a leader who's listening to our podcast and if they are about to embark on a major transition within the organization, or the organization is about to embark any transition, what is that one advice or suggestion that you would have for them?
Yeah, I would say that start with yourself first. Start with reflecting on, as a leader, what changes do I need to do within myself, whether it's behavior, capability, ways of thinking, my mental model, that would enable me to most successfully lead the transformation that I'm desiring for my organization. Because if they're able to be honest and open with themselves and recognize that it's not just about putting a new system or a new structure, that's going to be a lot about the internal work that the leaders themselves have to do for the success, for the authentic success of the transformation. If they're able to recognize that up front and start with that, I think they'll have a much higher chance of success with the transformation. There's a statistic out there, and I can't quote the exact number, but a huge number of transformation efforts fail. And one of the reasons they fail is because you've only looked at the transformation from a very technical perspective, but that human side, and starting with the very top leader, that hasn't been really addressed. So if you are able to start at that place and start with that, you have a much higher chance of success with the transformation.
Wisdom at its best. So, I know this is like so important. Just yesterday I was writing about this. That if we don't include that element, and even a flourishing organization, even if they're not going through change, but if we overlook the human side of it, we stop innovation. We are hindering future growth. So
absolutely. At the end of the day, no matter what business you're in, it's people business. Yeah. So the human aspect of any work, any organization, any business is so critical. It can make or break everything else that the organization is trying to do. So it starts and ends with people.
So
Ultimately, that's what it is.
we need to have more conversations like this. I think we're not talking enough about this, and especially the human side of it with what's happening around the world.
Yes.
And so thank you for your time and for sharing such wisdom nuggets with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Reena. This was such a delightful conversation, and I'm so glad that this time we recorded it. So hopefully, for me, this was both very enjoyable and also therapeutic. Talking about, as you said, we don't talk about these topics enough. And I think that this conversation for me is highlighted again, something that I've believed in for a long time, that it really comes down to those human relationships and human connections that are so critical. And no matter if what technology it is and what else is going on, those things need to be preserved, and they need to be preserved in organization. Human experiences need to be valued. Human beings need to be valued. And the more people feel that they could show up as their best selves, the better that they will perform, and the better the organization, the company, the firm, the business will perform.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Reena.
Yeah.